how much of this comes down to the system failing to give us the tools and the proper education and understanding of trauma versus it being up to the individual to look beyond that and take things under their own control?
That's an interesting question. Well, from my own experience, I teach a large lecture class of master's level students, about 200 master's students in an auditorium. And at the beginning of each semester, it's a one semester course. It's a lecture course, but I get very animated. I walk around on the stage, and I have the class ask me questions, and I ask them questions. So we get a little bit of a discussion going. At the beginning of the semester, every year, the class comes in each year more and more with these very rigid ideas about trauma. Some of the things we've talked about just now, the idea that trauma, everybody's traumatized, that trauma is hard to get rid of, that it's for any of the things that we've just talked about. And it requires a whole semester of my going through all the literature, presenting all the science, questioning all the assumptions, and gradually bringing them to see, here's what all of this research, there's mountains of research, and here's what it shows. Most people are not traumatized. Most people are actually resilient to trauma. Most people get upset for a very short term, and it's adaptive, etc. All the things we've been talking about. And it takes people about a semester, which is about 4 months or so, to kind of undo all the societal assumptions, which are very rife right now. These misunderstandings about trauma are everywhere in the social world now. I don't think it's the system as much as I think you use that word, the system. It's really, I think, this is going to sound like an old fart. I'm going to sound like an old fart here. I think it's the internet. And I don't think the internet is evil, or I don't think it's some malicious thing. There's some malice on the internet. The social media companies, I think, the powers that be, they are definitely feeding people unhealthy material because it makes them oodles of money. Definitely, that the algorithmic way social media works makes people oodles of money, whether it's unhealthy or not. But the internet, we're all trying to. I think we all have to grow up about the internet. We have to learn to what it does to us and how to use it effectively. But otherwise, it feeds us these mythical things. We just did a research study. One of my master's students, Bailey Schock is her name, and she did a fantastic job with this. We did a study on TikTok, and TikTok has a lot of people use TikTok, and TikTok has tried to install constraints about the use of words related to suicide. But people love to talk about trauma on TikTok. It's just too enticing, but it's also monetized. There's something called trauma dumping, and that's where people tell their trauma stories on TikTok. And then there's sites that gather all these things together in one place, and viewers flock to these sites to listen to people talking about their traumas. And there's advertising involved. Those sites generate a lot of advertising money. So TikTok then banned the use of suicide-related words, with the exception of people with sort of validated mental health credentials could talk about suicide. Because people like to do this so much, people started using what's called algo speak, which are words that allow you to talk about suicide and get past the censors, like unlive or suicide, or there are a host of other ones. And so what we did is simply look at transcripts of a bunch of these videos and code whether they had used algo speak or not. Some videos were able to talk about suicide and evade the censors by talking about suicide. And it turned out when people are using algo speak, they were generally the least healthy videos you could watch. They had the least sort of positive healing qualities to them, or whatever that would mean. They were really more of just sort of sensationalistic trauma stories. And so, our desire is to watch these things, to listen to these things, as what we were talking about before. We're wired for threat, and there's a prurient kind of interest in it too, and a kind of like this, I think something similar to horror movies, or something viscerally exciting, even if it's unhealthy. And we have to learn about that. We as humans have to learn about that and try to titrate that. And I think right now is a great time in history to think about that, even in terms of the current political climate. Um, One can be very upset. Anybody can be very upset of any political persuasion by going online, because you can find somebody telling you what some horrible thing somebody in the team that's not you did, right? And so I think it's very important, even for people who want to read the news and educate themselves, to titrate how much they look at just the internet for this stuff.
So much great stuff to unpack there.
Yeah.
I actually had that observation on my own just going through TikTok, and not specifically to trauma or suicide, but just problems in general. I came up with almost like a category for that. I call it Woe Is Me Content,
Ah, yeah.
where it's so easy just to talk about your problems and your struggles. And like you were talking about, people can grow big followings, they can make money off of it, they can get all this engagement on it. And from a brain wiring standpoint, you're like, ooh, I like that. I get a dopamine rush when I'm getting thousands of likes and thousands of comments of people just relating to my problems. And so I'm going to continue to do it. And I find it really fascinating about what you said with your teaching, where it's like a big part of your job is, okay, I need to unteach what they've learned,
Yeah.
and then I can actually teach them the truth on this topic.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting, and I don't know if I would call it the truth, but I would call it the scientific reality or the empirical reality. But yeah, it is taken that shape of unlearning the sort of assumptive world out in the floating around out there.